Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my talk. I'll be relatively short, and I'll cover the topic of India from an NRI perspective. Is it an obligation or an opportunity? When you think of what's happened with the brightest of the bright over the last 30 years or so, India has had to deal with a level of brain drain that's not happened in any other country in the world. The country spent significant amounts in educational institutions, created the best of the best, and out of the IITs, we see where a lot of these people have ended up around the world. Whereas, in many ways, India has not kept pace with its neighbors, with many other parts of the world. In 1984, the Indian economy was double the size of the Chinese economy. Today, 30 years later, the Chinese economy is 8 times larger than the Indian economy. 16 times variable in these 30 years. What went wrong? What's happened? In fact, in a week from now, there's a summit at Vigyan Bhavan called the World Toilet Summit. Why is it in India? Because India has become famous as a country that has more people with access to mobile phones, more people with personal mobile phones than have access to toilets. One of the biggest complaints that parents give why they don't send their daughters to school in rural India is the lack of toilets, the lack of sanitation. We have an epidemic of female feticide, not just in the poorest part of India, in places like Punjab, in the richest parts of India. We have issues in India of substance abuse that's reached epidemic levels in Punjab. And then the quality of education is not only directly linked to your economic status. The fact that 70% of India lives in rural India, 1 billion people live in rural India, where teacher absentee rates are about 30%. A third of the teachers on any given day don't show up to school. India has a lot of difficulties that require a collective effort. But I'm not here to talk about obligation. I want to talk about opportunity. My family left India when I was 8 years old in 1976. We first went to Iran, and then after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, we ended up in Canada. And when I talk at MBA schools in India and I talk to students in India, I talk about the fact that while my father 30 or 40 years ago left India looking for opportunities abroad, and he may have been correct that that's where the opportunity was, that's not the case today. Today, the real opportunities in the world exist in India, and only India. The US economy is starting to stagnate, and in my opinion, will never come out of this stagnation. It's an economy that's aging, and at best, if it grows sustainably at 3% a year, they will be very happy. The Chinese economy is starting to stagnate, and the bubble's about to blow, and it's an aging economy that is going to have difficulties for the next while. Same thing in Europe. The Indian economy is about to go through its next revolution. The first one, I think, happened in '92 with the end of the license rod and the impact of that. Now, with the implementation of stable government that can hopefully make some tough decisions, the Indian economy is going to go through some types of growth that we've never seen and don't normally expect. And I'll give you the example of the mobile phone industry and where it was 15 years ago versus where it's today. In the mid-90s, I was lucky enough to take my first company public on the NASDAQ, and I visited India with family, and the government was auctioning spectrum in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. And as they were auctioning spectrum in these cities, Patiala and Bathinda and Kanpur and other places, they had a lot of difficulty finding bidders for this wireless spectrum. Because in the mid-90s, people looked at it and said, hey, who's going to ever need mobile phones in this place? You know, maybe the surgeon that needs to be connected all of the time, he needs a mobile phone in Mumbai or Delhi. But sitting in Amritsar, who needs a mobile phone? And they couldn't believe why somebody would have the need for this. So BSNL, the government-owned operator, had a subcontract manufacturer in Ludhiana called Bharti. And they went to the Mittal family, who ran this company, who made phones for BSNL, and said, look, we need bidders for this. It's embarrassing that nobody wants to bid on the spectrum. And as a favor to them, they started bidding on the spectrum. And today, they're consistently listed among the 10 richest people in the world, because if anybody in India tells you they don't have a mobile phone, they're not being truthful, because there's very few that are left that don't have mobile phones. 900 million subscriptions in this country. And less than 10 years ago, people did not believe that the average person would need a mobile phone. I remember less than 10 years ago, when India only had 50 million mobile phone subscribers and China had 500 million, and I would say, everybody's going to have a cell phone. People would say, no, no, no. And I'd say, look at China. They'd say, yeah, but China's special. We see the same thing happening with the internet today. India only has 14 million broadband connections, and while 250 million people use the internet, the people that use the internet at least once a week is less than 50 million. And the people that use the internet at least once a week in China is 500 million. And that gap, that differential, will go away in less than 5 years. In less than 5 years, anybody and everybody you know will be using the internet in this country. And not everybody believes it. People will say, yes, no, you know, how will the poor discover it? How will the illiterate discover it? And so on. The same way that they do texting today, the same way that they learn how to use mobile phones, the potential of communication and commerce will drive them in that direction. This was the idea behind the whole concept of Akash and doing tablets that were low cost. That if you bring affordability to the masses, then you'll see mass adoption. And what's happened these last 2.5 years since these concepts started to come into India? Last 2.5 years, the Indian economy has been at its slowest pace in the last 15 years. The world's economy has stagnated. In fact, the deployment of computers in India in the last 2 years have stagnated. There's not been any growth. Except tablet computers, which were only being sold in the quantity of about 250,000, 2.5 lakh a year in 2011. Today, 50 lakh of them are sold every year. 20 times increase in that one market segment because affordability came into place. I truly believe that India will go from 50 million people that use the internet regularly to 500 million people that use the internet regularly. And when that happens, the manner in which that citizens are empowered will create opportunities that we've never seen before. Again, I'll point to China as an example. Today, India collectively manufactures and exports about $180 billion worth of goods annually across the country. That's it. In China, one website, Alibaba.com, enables $240 billion worth of manufacturing exports for that country. one website does $60 billion worth of additional transactional, then India as a country. That's the power of the internet, and that's the revolution that we see coming into India. Anybody that believes India is an obligation, good for them, and certainly we wish that they make that effort as an obligation. But the real opportunity, the real way that we want them to be thinking about India is the opportunity that exists. And those that miss it, I think that this is the boat that they'll miss. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.